My name is Brooke Wetzel, and this is the fall of 2025 in the Cognitive Psychology 340 class. And the title of my presentation is Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder and Cognitive Functioning. So during this presentation, we are going to get to understand the interconnectivity of ADHD and executive dysfunctioning or cognitive functioning. So, ADHD can be described as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and it is characterized by patterns of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. So, ADHD highly manifests in certain settings, and it primarily affects children as well as many adults. But here you can see that the patients of ADHD are primarily male and primarily white as well. So the symptoms of ADHD are that ADHD is a chronic condition and it persists throughout the whole life. So ADHD is a personal topic to me. I personally chose ADHD because I received a childhood diagnosis of ADD, which no longer exists, and I have a current diagnosis of ADHD. And ADHD ranks highest in cognitive interference, which is a study done by Morthy and colleagues, which states that ADHD interferes with many cognitive functions, such as executive functioning. So, executive functions can be described as control, working memory, inhibition, and emotional regulation. Control is things such as managing disruptive behavior or focusing on a certain task. So, with ADHD, a study done by Morthy and colleagues says that ADHD-affected individuals have trouble shifting their attention and managing impulses, which is a study done by Carr and colleagues. And working memory is another ADHD executive dysfunction area because those with ADHD have problems with temporarily holding information in an active state. So that means that incoming information is not processed as quickly or as well as compared to a non-affected individual. And then with inhibition, that is suppressing unfavorable responses. So, like when you want to say something that you shouldn't, people with ADHD often do not have the same level of suppression as compared to others. And then emotional regulation, that is actions such as self-soothing or like talking yourself down, which is also inhibited by ADHD as seen with a study. So some of the theories that I'm going to be exploring today is one that is suggested by Carr and colleagues that shows that ADHD and cognitive dysfunction have a causal relationship, so they co-occur. And then another theory that I'm exploring is by Yang and colleagues, is that ADHD and has co-occurring comorbidities that have higher impaired learning deficits. So there's more impairments with ADHD and comorbid mental illnesses. And then a study done by Yitzhak and colleagues shows that, or theorizes that executive deficits cause bad emotional regulation, so less abilities to suppress your emotions or self-soothe. And then a theory done by Harjtai and colleagues theorizes that ADHD causes internalization of mental illnesses. And then Dividi and Santangelo theorized that structural abnormalities in the frontal and parietal lobes are consistent with ADHD. So here we just have some graphs. ADHD has differentiation and memory recall performance, shown in the top left by Carr and colleagues. And then here we have on the top there is inhibition with ADHD versus non-ADHD. So this is abnormal inhibition and then normal inhibition. And then for control, ADHD affected individuals have a lower attention span, which is lower control, which was studied by Morthy and colleagues. And then for emotional regulation, there is many graphs that show that ADHD is not proficient in happy emotions or stress-resistant emotions. And then there is also the high levels of emotional lability, which is sudden dramatic shifts in mood that are not able to be controlled because of lower levels of emotional regulation in ADHD. So, a main theory of this study is that there are many structural abnormalities found in ADHD affected individuals. One, it was never just a diagnosis, it is structural. So these are characterized by abnormalities in the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, and the basal ganglia. And that was done by Davidi and Santangelo in 2025. So people with ADHD have delayed brain maturation and a reduced brain volume. And this study was conducted using C tasks, which C tasks are conflict tasks. An example of a conflict task is a stop and go task, for example, when you're driving and there's a stop sign. So the results of this study stated that those with ADHD have lower C task scores, which means lower abilities to interact with stop stimuli. And that interacts with these brain regions here because of a lack of inhibition. So the good thing about ADHD is that there is hope. So a study done by Yang and colleagues showed that children with ADHD, their inhibition is not very far behind their non-ADHD neurotypical peers. So that means that inhibition in children is not a large issue. And then with emotional regulation, a study done by Yatak and colleagues shows that self-reporting your emotions on a questionnaire significantly improved mood swings, so emotional ability. People with ADHD had less emotional ability, less dramatic mood swings when they answered self-reported questionnaires, and they reported more goal-oriented behavior. And then another glimpse of hope is with non-medicinal success with behavior. So the study done by Morthy and colleagues studied children and homeopathic approaches. This was done with parental reports, and they had success in non-medicinal strategies with behavior control. And then with working memory, it was found that a central approach is better to work on working memory rather than just approaching the memory, because working memory is interconnected with other executive dysfunction. And then some real-life research that can be applied to this is that with inhibition in ADHD, a study done by Yang and colleagues found that those with ADHD had poor immediate word recall. So that means that they were not able to suppress the distractions around them due to lack of inhibition, and then they performed lower on word recall tests. And then another one would be control in ADHD, was that this was an improvement, that volitional control practice showed improved behavior. So the child in the Morthy study, the parent recorded better behavior when the child practiced volitional control. And then for the working memory in ADHD, a holistic approach was studied by Carr and colleagues that there were more improvements with working memory in ADHD when it was focused on as a system and not just ADHD. And then with emotional regulation, there was 504 British adults that regularly answered emotional questionnaires. and they showed improvements in emotional regulation. And my conclusion is that ADHD symptoms are cognitive dysfunction. They have comorbidities, and there is a direct relationship between ADHD and cognitive dysfunction. And the reason why this is important is because ADHD is growing. Individuals with ADHD have a place in academic and professional settings. We belong, and we should not be overlooked. And ADHD can co-occur with mental illnesses, which means mental events. And the last point is that we are in a digital world, so triggers of ADHD are being increased, and so ADHD needs to be more studied with cognitive dysfunction and executive dysfunction.